Unceremoniously, the Dallas Cowboys ended the 2024 season without their starting quarterback, Dak Prescott. They finished the year firing head coach Mike McCarthy, and this was a team throughout the entire 2024 year where the defense was facing constant scrutiny. The running game ended up being a shell of what it used to be, and into the 2025 year, we are saying goodbye to a lot of longtime Cowboys in Dallas. Starting with the losses, you can't really get far into the Dallas Cowboys offseason, or at least talking about it, without mentioning the retirement of Zach Martin. This was a guy who, even into his mid-30s, was considered one of the top offensive linemen and one of the top free agents available, period. And his retirement isn't just a loss for the Dallas Cowboys, it's a loss for the legacy of this team, because this has been one of the guys. You think of the guys like Larry Allen, you think of guys like Tyron Smith, you think of guys like Travis Frederick, who are mainstay names as offensive linemen for the Dallas Cowboys. And to lose him doesn't just lose a great offensive lineman, it loses a great player and a great mentor for this team. And otherwise, in free agency, this team is also losing a lot of production, a lot of experience. You lose both of your backup quarterbacks. You lose defensive ends DeMarcus Lawrence and Chauncey Golston. You lose Jordan Lewis, Brandon Cooks, Rico Dowdle. You lose some guys that over the past half decade, especially in cases of guys like DeMarcus Lawrence, Jordan Lewis, Brandon Cooks for the last few years, Cooper Rush the last few years, Rico Dowdle this year. Guys who have really produced and guys who have really been integral parts of this franchise and of this roster who are now playing for other teams. However, with that being said, I think the Dallas Cowboys did a pretty good job of either re-signing or adding players to this roster that can supplement what they lost. You look at their trades, they trade for guys like Kenneth Murray, Kaiir Elam, and Joe Milton. Now, in Murray and Elam's case, these are two guys who were first-round picks, highly coveted players coming out of college who never really got on the right track to becoming a star. And in Joe Milton's case, he has played one game in the NFL, and in that one game, he looked like he could be a solid contributor at the quarterback position, whether that's as a starter or whether that's as a backup. In Dallas, that's probably as a backup unless Dak Prescott gets hurt. But even if he does get hurt, I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas goes the route of drafting a quarterback in the late rounds of the draft this year. And through free agency, the Dallas Cowboys add a trio of defensive ends who can contribute with Dante Fowler, Solomon Thomas, and Peyton Turner. They also add two solid running backs in Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Now, even though this could be a team that is targeting a running back in the early rounds of the draft this year, whether it's in the first round with names like Ashton Genty or in the second round with guys like Trevion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins, the additions of Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders doesn't just give them somebody that they can hand the ball to. It gives them two solid running backs that they can actually rely on in both the passing and running game. This isn't something they've had for maybe 3 or 4 years when Ezekiel Elliott was still in his prime and Tony Pollard was still a member of the Cowboys. And I think that's when we saw Dak Prescott at the top of his abilities, when he had two running backs, when he had a top receiver like a CD Lamb to boot, when he had an offensive line in front of him. And like I said, they do have a little bit of a depleted offensive line. You have Zach Martin retire, and you don't really have, Tyler Guyton, you hope can take that next step forward as an interior presence on the offensive line. And so you have a very young offensive line. You have names like Tyler Smith, Tyler Guyton, you add Robert Jones, and you hope somebody like Terrence Steele, who you're paying $18+ million for the next 4 years, you hope that that's a group that can come together and become one of the better units in the NFL. But the thing is, I also wouldn't rule out that their top pick in the draft this year is an offensive lineman. And as much credit as we don't want to give Jerry Jones in his drafting history, I think we forget a lot of the times that some of the best offensive linemen that have come into the NFL in the last 10 to 15 seasons. I named some of them already earlier. A lot of them have been drafted by Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. So I hold out a lot of hope that maybe that's the route that they go this year, is drafting more offensive linemen and developing them so that they can protect Dak Prescott. And so moving into the draft this year for Dallas, they have the number 12 overall pick, and they have 10 overall selections ahead of them. Now, I've already said it. I think offensive line is probably a good idea here, just as, they have a proven track record at that position. But this also is the time where Dallas needs to start adding some more playmakers for Dak Prescott. He loses Brandon Cooks. He loses Rico Dowdle, who, even though Dowdle, kind of got forced into the starting running back role last year, he still provided some ability at that position last year. And so, you're in a decent spot at 12. If you get one of Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, Emeka Ibuka, if you even get so lucky as to get Ashton Genty and you can have a three-headed monster in their backfield, I think you're looking at a much improved offense, and you're looking at a team that can start competing again in the NFC East. At the same time, I think defense is probably the better way to try to attack making this team better. I think in the secondary, yes, you do still have big names like Trayvon Diggs, like Deron Bland. You bring in a former first-round player in Kyer Elam. But I look at that back end where it's Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Marquise Bell. I look at that group, and honestly, even in the secondary, I look at that group as one that can really be improved upon. And, there's a guy in Janae Barron who is a Texas guy who, he wouldn't have to go very far, and he would obviously have a very big support group for him as a Dallas Cowboy. But you also think about possibly the pass rush as well. If you can get lucky and get somebody like a Jalen Walker from Georgia, or you even maybe take somebody who can affect the running game as well, somebody like a Walter Nolan. Going back to the secondary as well, I think you look at guys like Malachi Starks, I always struggle with his name, Nick Emmanworiye. There's a lot of guys defensively and offensively, I think, as a Cowboy fan, if I were a Cowboy fan, I would love to have added to this team, because really this is a team offensively where I think you have the quarterback, you have the receiver, now you have a couple of running backs, you hopefully have a good young offensive line. I think at this point you can kind of afford to not have as much added to the offense through the draft, more than you can the defense. Because defensively, even though they do still have the playmakers, they do still have Micah Parsons, they do still have Trayvon Diggs, they still do have a lot of guys. They re-sign Osa Odighizuwa, and they bring in Dante Fowler. Those three names alone, Parsons, Odighizuwa, and Fowler, those three can get after the quarterback really well. You probably still want more added, and especially if you have a chance to raise the ceiling of your defensive line and your pass rush, you have to take that chance. Overall, I'm going to give the Cowboys a B for this free agency period. I don't love all of the signings that they made. I don't love some of the guys that they let go. But I do love that they actually tried a lot harder this year to address their pressing needs. Last year, we knew they needed a running back. They didn't really try very hard. This year, we knew even more, especially losing Rico Dowdle, that they needed a running back, and they actually did something about it. And they actually did something about getting more talent to their defense, and they did something about adding a more competent, more youthful backup behind Dak Prescott. And so overall, it felt like this year Dallas actually did something about their flaws, and they addressed them with guys that made sense.